All right, hello everyone. Welcome to our first lesson of the year. We are starting off in Unit 1, the Middle Ages, and our first lesson will be on feudalism. The essential question for this section will be, who did the feudal system benefit the most? So, let's get started. So, feudalism. Feudalism is a military and political system based on land ownership and personal loyalty. The king owns all land and resources. People in the kingdom get land and resources in exchange for services. So you can see in this picture here, you have the king on top of everyone, which is a very good visual description of what feudalism is. If you are the king, you're living a good life under feudalism. All right, we're going to come up to a few more vocabulary terms. Don't worry about the vocabulary. We will be doing a separate vocabulary lesson. So, fief is another word for land. This is in Old English, this is Old English at this time. So first, you have the king. The king is at the top. The king owns all the land. The king allows lords to oversee sections. So right underneath the king is your lord. The lord gives land away in return for service. So the word you might actually be very familiar with is landlord. Oh, I don't know why that's coming up over there. Let me try and fix this. Let me see if I can. So landlord actually comes from feudalism. The landlord was the lord of the land that you lived on. Next, you have your knights. Your knights are your people who manage the land and promises to protect the lord. We're going to have a visual in the next slide so you can see what it looks like. And then finally, you have the serfs. This is a peasant or poor person that works the land for a little bit of food and a place to live. If you are a serf, you are not really benefiting from this. You do a lot of work and you don't get much in return. So let's take a look at an image that kind of describes this very well. We have here a pyramid where you have the king at the top. The king is by himself. Back in this time, the king ruled under the power from God. It was a divine right to rule. Most kings in Europe got their power from God. And I believe right now the only king or queen who gets that power from God is the king or queen of England, which is interesting because it's quite an old idea. So underneath the king is your lords. I would say ladies, but women aren't really included in this section. It's a men only kind of situation. So they are kind of like your policemen. They are the soldiers, they protect the king. Um, the lords, they are basically your king's right hand man. They are your king's best friend. They're going to do whatever the king needs. Okay. They also send the king money. Um, the money which is mostly coming from the people below the lords. So, underneath the lords, you have the knights or the vassals, which are basically like soldiers or police officers that are owned by the lords. So, back in the old days, you didn't really. It's kind of basically a slavery type situation. Um, Serfs or peasants did not really have freedom. Uh, they were owned by lords, and that's pretty much how it worked. Um, Knights, very similar. They didn't really have that much freedom. They had more freedom than serfs, but they were still um, less free than the lords. Lords had a lot of freedom compared to everyone else. And then finally, you have the serfs, which are basically slaves. They got very little money. They had to work the land, they had to pay rent, they had to pay taxes. Whatever food they grew, they had to pay it to the king and to the lords. Um, so basically, they're working all year. All the food that they grow, most of it, they're not even keeping. They're giving it to the kings, to the lords, and to the church. Okay, so let's go to the next level. We're going to go deeper into each level now. So, top level, we have the kings and queens. Most of the time, it was the kings. We didn't have that many queens in power. Queens are usually just the wife of the king. They are the top of the social structure. They had the most power and wealth. They competed for power with other kingdoms, so they fought. But they didn't really fight because they had you fight. They gave fief to nobles in exchange for loyalty to the crown. So basically, they gave land to nobles. Um, Kings expect that nobles produce from the land given and provide protection to the king or queen. So, um, the king gives you land, and you um, make food and give it back to the king. Remember, the king technically owns that land. Next slide. The nobles, the lords, and the ladies. Um, you still have lords and ladies, but they're not the same as what they had back in the Middle Ages. So they're in the second tier. They have the second most power in the feudal system. Um, in terms of numbers, the king, there's only one. There's lots of lords, so they have tons of power. They lived on the land given by kings. They lived in what's called manors, which is the land the nobles lived on. They exchanged land with knights for military protection. So you see, there's a lot of exchange going on. The king gives land to the lords give land to the knights. The knights protect the land given by the noble and the king, and the knights fight in honor of the king. So, back in these days, your wealth was determined by how much land you had. And this kept people wealthy for a long, long time. And you didn't see that wealth go away until after World War One, actually. Then you have the knights. This is probably your most famous part of the Middle Ages because everyone knows about the knights. You have the Knights of the Round Table. You see them in fairy tales and nursery rhymes. Um, Lots of children's shows, especially in the West. So knights are the third level of feudalism. Even though they are close to the bottom, they are still pretty far up because um, the below the bottom level is a huge level. They went to war for the king and protected the land. They were able to live on their lord's noble manor in exchange for protection. They offer loyalty to nobles and to the king. Um, that is one power that a knight had. Um, a knight could leave you and go to another lord. If you, as a lord, were mistreating your knights, those knights could leave you. And then suddenly you're a lord without knights, which means another lord could come in and take your stuff, which happened. So, um, one big key vocabulary word is chivalry. Chivalry is a code followed by knights. Chivalry is famous. I even hear about men um, acting chivalrous today. It's mostly in regards to respect towards women, living by honor, being honest, and serving God and King. It's very serious for knights. Um, it is a way for knights to live. And then finally, you have peasants and serfs. So this is the lowest in the feudal system. They have no power, they have no land. Um, there are people who are tradesmen. Those are people who are can make like swords and stuff, but there's very few of them, and they tend not to live in one place. They tend to move around, and when I say move around, they move from country to country. So the serfs tend to stay still. They lived on land provided by the nobles, but they are expected to farm the land and pay rent. So they had to work the land, and then the fruit of the labor, the food, they actually had to pay that to the lord and to the king. They received food, shelter, and protection from knights and nobles. So it was a social contract between um, the king, the knights, and the noblemen with the peasants and the serfs. So we have a video here. I'm going to link this in Google Classroom. You can watch it on your own. We're going to go on to the next page. You are expected to watch this because there are questions, so make sure you do watch it. Next, we got manors. Manors are what we call the land given to lords. Manors are very large. The manor usually had a very large house or a castle. If it had a large house on it, that house on a manor might be called a mansion. That word comes from French and Spanish. One lord could actually have many manors. In fact, it's very common, especially as time went on, for a lord to have many manors. Lords would often give extra manors to vassals or knights in exchange for protection, and sometimes those knights would become lords themselves. Next. Next, we have the Lord and Serf Agreement. So, the agreement is the Lord provides housing, farmland, and protection. The serfs provide care for animals, farming the land a few days per week, tasks of the estate, portion of the grain, pay a marriage tax, and pay a tax to grind the grain. There's actually a lot of terms in English language that come from this time. We could actually talk a little bit about that in class. Um, but the Lord doesn't just provide housing, farmland, and protection. For example, at Christmas time, the Lord is expected to provide a Christmas feast for everyone, including the serfs. Um, that is just one of their expectations. So now let's take a look at a picture of a typical manor house and land. So here you have your pasture with your sheep. You have a field with some serfs' houses. You have a barn, a water mill. A water mill is where you go to grind your grain. You had to pay a tax on that mill, though. You have your community church where everyone is expected to go every Sunday. The Lord is looking to make sure everyone is there. It is a serious thing. It's basically a large town, and everyone is looking towards each other, making sure everyone is there, making sure social order is kept. So next. Serfs were self-sufficient. Serfs produced everything they needed for daily life. Crops, fuel, cloth, leather goods, lumber, even soap, the stuff they need to clean. They had to produce it all. I even have videos showing what life was actually like for serfs. And if we have time, we could actually watch an episode. It's a very interesting to watch. Serf homes is a crowded cottage. There's usually 1 or 2 rooms. Pigs and other animals slept in the house. They slept on insect-infested straw. Well, that's not entirely true. They would put herbs underneath the straw to try to get rid of the insects, but it didn't really work. They ate what's called pottage, which is a soup made from vegetables. And that soup would be refilled every single day with new vegetables and new water. So it was a never-ending soup. Their breakfast and lunch every day would be bread and cheese. You drink beer every day, even the children, because back in these time, water was very dangerous. And serfs accepted their lives. They believed that God determined your place in society. Like, this was what you had to do. All right, here's another video that you can watch at another time. We're going to move on. So here are the social classes, just to remind you. At the very top, you have your kings and queens, those who rule. Then you have your lords and knights, those who fought. Number 3, men and women of the church. And when they say women, it's more men. Women of the church is nuns, and nuns were usually lower than the men. And then finally, the largest group is your peasants and serfs. So that is all for your first lesson. Make sure that you have filled out your notes. You could have done it digitally. You could have done it on paper. And I will see you in the next video.